So, first of all, let me just introduce everybody. Richard, if you could just quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll go around the table.
Good morning. Do you hear me?
Yep. Now I hear you. Yeah.
Nice to meet everyone. My name is Richard Schultz. I'm with Stars Play International. I've been in the localization business now for 12 years, initially creating localized versions of content for licensed distribution, and now distributing our own content on the Stars Play platform. Stars Play is launched now in 55 countries, and we're in 14 languages.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Ali, you're next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ali. I am from Istanbul, Turkey. We have a company called Studio DSE that does localization work for some of the biggest VOD platforms around the world. We mainly do Turkish and many other languages.
Great, thank you. Thomas, you did join us. You made it.
Yeah, contrary to rumors otherwise. So I'm joining from Denmark today, but Flint is based in Sweden. We do mainly subtitling, have around 1,500 linguists working in our network globally, with many large clients, not least of which Netflix.
And Thomas is the CEO. He forgot that part. And then Bobby, if you could also join us, also from Denmark right now, I think.
Yeah, I fled to France, so I'm sitting in a hotel room in France right now. I heard that Thomas was coming to Denmark. No, my name is Bobby Johar. Thank you so much for letting me join you guys. I am the CEO of a company called Descent Studios. We help content publishers around the world with digital delivery services, and recently also heavily with localization.
All right, great. So let's dive in. You all heard me, hopefully you heard me talk a little bit about the gold rush and my long history of California. What do you think of that? Do you think there's anything there? Does it sound familiar? We'll start with Bobby.
It does sound familiar. I jumped in the middle of it. I had some technical issues, but I would say in terms of whether it would last or not last, at least in the current moment, it is explosive. It's explosive material for sure across the whole value chain. And this goes for the translators who are hopefully listening today, as well as the media fulfillment partners within the localization industry and all the OTT providers that you presented just before. Whether it would last, it's really up to the emerging technologies and also in terms of how the different players are able to evolve and adapt to the market demands.
Yeah. Thomas, what do you think?
Well, I'm very new to all of this, so I'm doing a lot of listening these days. But I think when you look at there's some statistics came out about how many shows are in production from the major streamers at the moment. And Netflix has got more shows in production globally than the rest of the top 5 put together. So I think there's still a lot of capacity for further investment. I think this battle's got some time to play out.
Yeah, I agree. Ali, how do you think about this? And you're experiencing it, right? I think Turkey is busier than it's ever been, I believe. Yeah.
It probably is. I think we have some more big platforms to be launching in the coming year or so. So it's still on the tip of the iceberg phase for me. And we're still talking about the other platforms still doing less and less originals than Netflix. So just as others have said, I think we are just beginning. And at least for the next decade, I would say the ship's going to be faster than it is right now.
Yeah. Richard, what do you think? You have a first row seat to all this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's definitely from the studio side. It's definitely exploding, right? I think we launched in initial territories. We had to go out for thousands of hours of new dubs and subs just on library content alone, right? So how do we find a variety of partners to help us support that and hit those launch dates? It's a huge challenge, right? How do we find those efficiencies to get those initial launches up and off the ground? I think we're in steady state in a number of those initial territories, but there are challenges there too. A lot more new content productions, timing and launch dates on new content releases are still pretty challenging. And then as we expand into territories, we'll be launching all over again. So how do we continue to scale and find efficiencies in doing that? It's a big challenge for us.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So actually the next question is kind of for you also, Richard, which is you talked a little bit about it, but what are some of the real specific challenges that you're facing as you try to launch Starz in more markets?
Yeah, definitely on the new launches, right? How can we work with volume and scale quickly? We're taking a library that maybe hasn't been localized in a new territory launch. How do we present that to our localization partners? And how do we work towards a launch date? Even in the steady state, I think timing is always a big challenge for us. New content, especially maybe in the recent times of COVID, productions are running tight, and we're running early versions out to our localization studios. It requires a lot of collaboration and communication as changes come down from an early cut to a lock cut to a final cut, and then how can we make sure we're picking up anything at the last minute to still make delivery and hit that launch date. So timing is definitely a challenge for us. And I think even beyond the content localization as well, the same team over at, we're also managing the technical side and the localization of those apps as they stand up in those territories. So how do we find teams to support the expansion of the Starz Play app locally as well, and the localization around the actual application as well? Again, it's all about how can we hit those very aggressive launch dates.
Yeah. Bobby, let's shift gears just a little bit. You're kind of an expert at going through launches. You went through a bunch of Netflix. You went through Netflix launches, several of them across Europe and particularly the Nordics, and also Apple. So, what do you think? How are the launches with other companies different than with Netflix? And what are the challenges in terms of supporting them?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a stark difference, I would say, with the likes of Apple and Netflix, and now also with the Disney Stars onboarding the scene. When you deliver for a platform on behalf of a content publisher, you can really either just make sure that you can deliver the assets that are provided as easily as possible to the requirements of the OTT marketplace, or you can also quality assure and even create assets to specific standards for the different platforms. And with respect to, for instance, Netflix and Apple, they are very much the gold standard of this industry. And with that, I mean that the attention to detail is incredible. You were in Netflix back in the early days, and what was fascinating for us and for me every time I visited the headquarters in LA was that the attention to detail, it was all intentional, and with that I mean that surely the VOD of the streaming industry is surely a numbers game, where sustainable success is ultimately it's about growing the subscription numbers and maintaining or retaining them. But the global leaders such as Netflix has truly proven, I think, that the crazy growth combined with these low-cost business model is never, and I think it was never meant to be at the expense of quality. And so this insane attention to quality has been placed on the suppliers or the preferred partners, if you will, in this ecosystem. They simply ask for more. And the way that the relationships are regulated today is, as you said in your presentation, is very, very much metrics based to ensure that you have a best in class approach, if you will, but also that we pay attention to the evolving customer preferences. And I think that is some of the things we learn from the market leaders, that the route to growth is a relentless vision towards perfecting the customer experience. You coined it at one time I met you. It was all about if it distracts the consumer experience, we want you to pay attention to it. And I think this is something that is so very different from many other platforms. On the other hand, we can see that with the gold standard, if you will, that the industry as a whole is following in these footsteps. So yeah, so in that context, I think that we will see more of that it's not just about adding subscribers; it's really paying attention to the supply chain as a whole, and to deliver what you call quality at scale.
Yeah. Thank you, Bobby. Ali, I'm hearing rumors, and I kind of alluded to this in my presentation, that in some cases it's so busy, and Turkey is one of those markets that's known for being very busy right now, that people are actually having to turn work away. Is that true? And have you actually had to turn work away, or is it are you able to mostly absorb everything?
Well, rumors go around. I heard the same. I haven't experienced it firsthand, but personally, for us, we've been prepared for the past year and a half. I think we always had this idea and the ambition to actually enlarge the business itself, to be prepared for the incoming new launches with Disney, Amazon, and everyone else on the line to be launched in Turkey. Because just as you mentioned, Turkey is an incredibly big market. Like 85 million people, and incredibly big portion of this is youth, and the content is getting consumed like crazy. And it was bound to be like all the other players will want a piece of the cake. So personally, for us, we haven't turned out any work yet, because we expanded our studio capacity 3 times in the past 6 months. We've opened a new headquarters. So we got more studios working now. We're constantly recruiting new people. It's really hard, actually. What I quote that from the part of your presentation. It's really hard to find actually qualified people that's been doing the work for a long time to actually integrate into your own workflow. So we don't turn down work, but I would say the most challenging part is to find people that are already ready to work for a workflow like this. That's been working for VODs, that's been doing deliverables for them. I think that would be the real problem where the thing's at.
Yeah. So the people are the big limitation to some extent. Yeah. So Thomas,
Yes.
I know you're mostly listening, but you have an interesting perspective because you are new to the industry. What are your general, and you come from a business background, so what are your general observations of this sector? What are your takeaways? How healthy do you feel like it is? Where are the opportunities?
Well, I think if you look at the macro trends, which we've already been talking about with respect to the gold rush, but even at a more macro level than that, you look at the rate of digitalization, move to working from home, further vertical integration, particularly in digital workflows. So there are some global trends here which have a significant effect on this industry, which are also having significant effects on other industries, which were in many cases accelerated by the pandemic. You couple that with this gold rush, the streaming activity, and it's a really interesting mix. So I think for me, sort of two areas which were perhaps interesting, but for the people who decided to bring me in to Plint. So one is the technology side of things. I've worked with various different kinds of technology, mainly software, for over 20 years now. But I think it's very easy when people mention technology in the context of localization to immediately think about machine translation and those kinds of technologies. But actually, it's the scaling of the fundamental workflows, which is where we put most of our effort. It's the ingest, it's moving the content around the right stages, making sure that it's matched with the right resources and that it flows through. And as we're scaling, of course, that presents challenges. So I think from that perspective, that's more where I'm focusing my efforts from my technology background. And then from a commercial background, I think, again, another global trend is the desire for larger companies to work with suppliers not as a supplier, but instead as a strategic partner, a digital partner. And I've had experience building those kinds of relationships with large corporates previously. And I think there's evidence in the market that trend is happening here. There's still a huge long tail. If you look at the Slater report, around 70% of all LSP industry is performed by companies turning over less than $1 million. But at the same time, the companies who performed the best during the last challenging 18 months, they're the super agencies. So there does seem to be a benefit to having scale here. And I think one of those benefits is the ability to carry large accounts and deep relationships with large players, which is difficult to do if you can only meet a small amount of their requirements. I think you need to be able to deliver a bigger and bigger part of their digital workflow.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. You said a couple of things that I just want to spend another second or two on, which is I do think that your intuition or your interest in sort of the workflow management, orchestration, and all of that at scale is really fascinating. And I can tell you that was actually one of the things that Netflix always cared a lot about was, everybody does just sort of default to machine translation memory, because those are the things that are just on everybody's, I guess, collective anxiety list. But the reality is that actually matching the perfect resource with the perfect piece of content is really interesting. And doing that at scale, in real time and all of that. And so I think, I remember, this is actually something that a lot of people don't know, but when Netflix was looking at things, we actually looked at how, particularly with localization, we looked at how FedEx assigns flights, because to pilots, because if you think about it, you have a person who is qualified on a very specific piece of equipment. Not every pilot flies every airplane, and they have to be specifically rated. And then you had what routes the pilots liked to fly. And then you had what their availability was during a certain given period of time. And I think when you start to do all of that, and what the reason we picked FedEx is because FedEx had the highest satisfaction of pilots that were most happy with the way their routes were selected. And they had built this system themselves, whereas like UPS pilots were unhappy, DHL pilots were like, oh, I get bad routes sometimes, but FedEx pilots were really, really satisfied with the way they were treated by FedEx. And so we at Netflix looked into this. We figured it was really hard to do, actually, and better left for the industry to figure out. But I do think that that's an interesting point, which is there's a whole bunch of technology stuff that people miss that's really about just leveraging what's available better. And I think that's an interesting opportunity. The other thing I would say is that you said that was interesting was just about the scale. I mean, I do think that there is something to be said about there's a desire at the highest level. Certainly platforms like Disney and some of the other studios, they really prefer to work with just one or two vendors and then let the vendors kind of manage everything. And so I think that that speaks to some people's desires to work with fewer vendors and have a deeper integration with them in order to be able to get what they want done. It's a philosophical thing, but it's undeniable that there are some people that prefer that. So next, let's go, Bobby, back over to you. Over the years, you've hired a lot of subtitlers, I believe. So what do you typically look for? What separates the ones that get an offer from Bobby and the ones that don't get an offer from Bobby?
In the beginning, in the early days, I would say to a great extent still, we were very much focused on that the translators were native of nature, meaning that if we were to translate into a specific language, we were thought from the very beginning, as our localization experience stemmed from Netflix, that it would be highly appreciated that if we were to localize in Spanish, it would be a Spanish linguist that would preferably have years of experience within this domain. And so native was number one. And then secondly, because we didn't train the resources ourselves, we would simply scout for already vetted, seasoned translators. I mean, if they were working for Plipt or for somebody else and they were independent contractors, we would recruit them for a project. We were the hustlers, the gold rushers of this industry, the opportunities. And so over the course of time, as we learned that we had to work much more in a sustainable manner, there's so many other parameters that comes into play. Caring for detail, being responsive, all of these things is something you learn when you work with the resources. And since we are also a very workflow-oriented company, we found out that if we needed to scale, we also needed to be responsive to the customer's demand. Just a week ago, we received a request, as an example, for stand-up comedy that had to be provided into 6-7 languages. Some stand-up comedian had some success, I believe, in expanding their content to different territories. We responded within 30 minutes to this request, although it had been distributed across the table, across the board, simply because we are analyzing and deconstructing all the resources we work with and try to put their profiles into systems so that we can match exactly, as you said, Chris, the demands of the market. And so we have, in order to scale this, we have realized that we need to build an academy. And so this is the way we will choose. We're onboarding as of next month. We'll be onboarding and inviting people across the industry to, just like a soccer team, you need to have your own training camp. So as a threshold, it will be native. It will be reliability, responsiveness, and those traits alike. But in the future, if we want to stay in the game, we need to train them ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you. Richard, I want to shift gears just a little bit. I know this about you, but a lot of people maybe don't know this about you, that you actually went to film school and you have a background in film. So how much do you see localization as a utility versus an extension of storytelling in another language? How do you balance those two things?
I think it's actually one of the challenges today too, right? The content has become richer and more complex in a lot of ways too. A lot of our series content has a multilingual approach as well. So how do we take content where the intent is to give it this global multilingual experience? How do we incorporate that into localization so that still plays even in another territory? Creatively, you see a lot more complex graphic events in content now. How do we kind of present that experience locally as well? We're definitely trying to take more steps to think about the creative approach to localization and is it resonating locally and not just translated locally. We just released a series, not to plug a show, but in just the last month or so, we released a series called Blind Spotting, which is an extension of the film that was released a couple of years ago. And it has these very complex kind of spoken word poetry events, and kind of rhymes and raps, and it's a big part of the creative approach to the film and the series itself. So how do we collaborate with our localization partners? We immediately teamed up with the same studios that had worked on the film, since they had the experience already of working with this kind of material. But how do we approach what events do we dub? What events do we only subtitle? What is the studio capable of in terms of talent and the ability to dub some of these more complex events as well? So the content is becoming creatively more challenging. So how can we work with the localization studios to reproduce that in a local way? Where those themes still resonate, where that creative approach is still meaningful and not just simply a translation.
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about the creative side of it. It's less about getting the version done, but is the version working? And how can we measure whether or not it's effective?
Yeah, that's kind of gets to the point I was talking about, which is, earlier, which is, how I have no doubt that everybody like yourself wants their content to be successful globally, but how do you measure that? Because there's so many other reasons why something may or may not do well that isn't localization, and so how do you separate that and sort of squelch out it didn't have as much marketing, or it's content that people they don't like in that region, or whatever, right? How do you squelch those signals out and just get to all things being equal, the dialogue that was recorded in the dubbed version or the subtitling didn't get it right? It's a very complicated problem. And I think that's actually a piece of technology everybody'd like to figure out, is how do you know when it works and when it doesn't work. But anyways, so let's talk a little bit, Ali. We're seeing a lot of things, and the reason I picked this question for you specifically, because there's a lot of content that gets exported out of Turkey. So you have like 50 meters squared, and some other, I believe the Protector is also, I think, a Turkish title. You're starting to see more titles leave Turkey. There's a lot of Turkish dramas that are, that are sort of getting exported. You're seeing this phenomenon. Can you speak to that at all? Like, it's kind of this whole new wave of localization that's not like English to Turkish, but rather Turkish to German or Swedish or some other language. Could you speak to that at all, like what you see?
Well, actually, it's not new for Turkey to export content. For long years, we've been exporting content to specific regions like Latin America. Like our soap operas are really, really big over there. And I know that there are specific casted actors and actresses that do voices of the specific actors and actresses over here. So it's a really big and established market for our content to be exported over there, starting with Latin America. But what Netflix does right now is taking this and putting it on a global scale, since it's not only just Latin America right now, but as you mentioned, it's already also getting Spanish or German or Swedish or Chinese. And they're ramping it up. As far as I know, they are in the process of establishing a new base in Istanbul. So they're opening up their own office to oversee the production of new originals, since they are increasing the new originals. I think I can't speak to the number, but I know they are going to be multitude of what it is right now in a year or so. So they are pushing it up a lot more than originals they do originally, like a year ago or two. And just to oversee that original production and everything, they're establishing a new base in Istanbul. So I can say even if like we had this notion of exporting content for the past, I don't know, 20, 25, maybe 30 years, it's only going to get bigger and it's only going to get more global from this point on, as Netflix and potentially all other new platforms are pushing up new originals from Turkey. Because I know for a fact, like, we as a country are great when it comes to producing series. It's like there are multitudes, I don't know, 5, 10 different series airing every night in the TV, and it's really easy for us in a production sense to take this model and work it for the international area and the VOD platforms as well. So I can say that it's only going to go bigger from this point.
Yeah. So Thomas, I'm going to come back to you. I gave you the hardest question of the day. I apologize, but what do you think is that there's always a tension between human storytelling and machine translation? Let's answer maybe the easy question first, which is, can companies replace translators yet? And if not, what is where is it? Where is that mix right now? And what do you think, in just your own opinion? And I know it's very early days for you, but what is the mix? What's the sweet spot?
I think it's what you touched on in the end of your presentation. It's about understanding what the value is in the business case. So if you have a low value content that's produced on a small budget, which is then going to a market which in and of itself is not a large market, then it's difficult to justify a big budget for the localization for that content in that market. But if you have a piece of high quality gold standard content from a big studio that they want to take out globally, that their whole reputation lies behind, then they will invest in getting it right. And at the moment, the only way to do that is with humans. I mean, we've all, I think, been playing with various bits of this just because we've been based at home in the last 18 months, and the real-time speech recognition that's just part of the meeting tools that we use is good enough for that purpose. I mean, it's not like any of us were going to be hiring people to type notes while we were having our meetings. So compared to that, it's a big improvement, right? So I guess it's very much a question of, what are you trying to achieve and what's the business case there?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Is that I think that it's easy for people to back their thinking into this sort of very narrow space of it's absolute this or that, and the reality is it's actually a spectrum. And I think that some things will get there faster than others. But I personally believe, this is my opinion, that human storytelling is still going to take a while. To be displaced. I don't expect to read a book, and I know it's not exactly the same thing. I don't expect to read a book or go see a movie that was derived entirely by AI. In the near future. That'd be an interesting project to see what kind of movie you'd end up with. Maybe it'd be Tron, I don't know, but or Terminator. But anyways, but I don't know that. I think it's probably got similar parallels to that. So it's very interesting. I'll ask. This is kind of a tricky question for Bobby, but I know he can take it. That's why I gave it to him. Which is, there's this notion of companies getting really massively rich off of all of the localization that they're doing. And so I guess I'll ask you, how much fuel did your private jet burn that you took down to France? How rich is Dicentia, or is that just not true?
Very rich. We're very rich. Richard, can we have a talk afterwards? No, I'm not sure whether it's a misconception. I mean, in the moment of time, I think most of the providers in the space are growing. And I think that they can attribute a big contribution of their top line and even parts of their bottom line to localization, thanks to the initiatives of Stars Netflix and those alike. So in this moment of time, of course, it's growing rapidly. But you're right. I mean, the localization is a smaller contribution business area versus, for instance, packaged media or digital delivery, quality assurance, all of which we can handle internally. And so it's all about how you, I think, perceive yourself. I mean, where are you located? And we looked at ourselves as being, a company that could help content publishers end to end from the very early days. That didn't mean that we would get there from day one. And our approach would be very workflow oriented. And so when we, crack the localization in the context not of machine learning, but in the context of productivity, if you will, that would allow us to scale, I think that's where we took off. And we only took off because there's a demand. And if you are a media fulfillment company, at the heart of fulfillment, there is this core belief that, somebody needs to get more done from one place, if you will. And so if you regard the industry as a whole, the industry needs localization. And so we had to make that an integral part of our business.
Yeah. Thank you, Bobby. And this is kind of a sort of similar question, but for Ali, which is, dubbing has often been seen as this very protectable business because you have to have a studio and it's brick and mortar and you have to have dubbing directors and actors come in and they work with everybody, and it's very much an in-person thing. But COVID really did sort of challenge that, and a lot of people had to work remotely. You had to have remote dubbing. Do you think that remote dubbing and synthesized voices and things like that, are they really posing a threat to dubbing, or do you feel like mostly there's not a appetite for those things right now? And I realize I've just been talking about how we need empirical data. I'm asking for your opinion. So it is something that we probably need to study, but in your opinion, how do you feel about it?
I think this ties in well with what we've been just talking about, how the machine translation sits in the translation industry right now. This will be probably according to what the project's needs will be, how important it is, how big it needs to be, like how accurate and how perfect it needs to be for the client. Because remote dubbing works. It works when it needs to work, especially during last year's quarantine period. It helped us a lot. It pushed projects out of the door, and they were better than expected. But still, it boils down to the question, like, if we need the best of the best, at least for right now, I don't know what technology will bring in 5 years, we still need the conventional, traditional brick and mortar studios with the directors on site, everyone together to actually get the feeling, to actually get the best voice possible out of the microphone and the audio workstations and equipment and everything. For that, I believe, at least for the time being, we still need the traditional methods, but definitely, especially with COVID, the technology has pushed further. Maybe we advanced, I don't know, 5 to 10 years worth of dubbing advancement in a year thanks to COVID. But I can absolutely see it having a place in the entire dubbing industry, depending on the quality that needs to be.
Yeah. Okay. We're getting down to the wire a little bit in terms of time, and so
yes,
as a matter of fact, we might be over. Yeah.
I also wanted to give someone from audience a word because some people are still with us and wanted to ask you something. So if you have something, I know that this person wanted to ask the question very much.
Okay.
Hey guys, been listening for you for 19 minutes. It's nice of you to finally talk with us. The screen is there, so and the camera is here. I am kind of turning both ways. We have only the vendor side today, right? We don't have anyone from the OTT side.
That's not correct, actually. Stars
is the buy side. Well, I asked the question to David Bryant about internalization of technology. He didn't know the answer. Perhaps you know. How do you think the language teams which are appearing and building up across the OTT providers will go about technology? What they will internalize? What are they working on? We know that Netflix has the originator. What do the others have? What does Disney Plus have? What does Peacock have? How are they going about it? In the text translation world, there was a big explosion of the translation management systems, and it continues to grow at a faster rate, like 2 times faster than the services market. What about the media localization technology? What's going to be used, and how are the buyers going to structure their internal teams? What do you see from your side? What kind of trends or intelligence?
When you ask that question, do you mean what types of tools are they using to manage the work, or to actually do the work? That's an important distinction.
Well, I'm interested in both the workbenches. Do they come back to doing the work themselves, to working with freelancers on that they need the workbench, or they just have the workflow technology, especially if they're working multi-vendor? They probably want to internalize the technology and standardize it across a few different countries. So both sides of the question would be interesting, if you have anything to share.
Yeah, I don't know, Richard, if you want to speak for Stars, but I can say that most of I still have regular contact with a lot of the other studios and a lot of the other platforms, and there's not really, I'm not seeing a huge appetite to go much beyond improving their tools for orchestrating the work. So how they manage the work and how they assign the work and how they pair it with the right resources. I haven't seen much beyond that. And a lot of times, and I don't know, maybe Thomas might want to speak to this too, what I am finding, what I do see a lot is platforms leveraging their vendors' portals to be able to orchestrate the work and assign it. So in other words, I know, Bobby, you have a portal that does that. I believe Plent also has a portal that does that. Zoo has a portal that does that. So I think that, what you see a lot in the studio content side is just them logging in and leveraging those tools, and maybe building a little bit of shimware, software-wise, in order to be able to connect to those tools and maybe present it in their own UI. But generally, the guts of it tend to be with the partners. I don't know, Richard, do you have anything different to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I would add a little bit to that. So we have a lot of ingrown or homegrown tool sets, right? When we talk about like operational workflow to manage content, most of that is dependent on how do we source content from our DAM tool sets internally, and then how do we present that to our localization vendors in a secure way so they can produce versions at an early stage. So you have your content side and how we think about workflow and moving content internally and then out to vendors, and then how do we bring things back in once the productions are complete. A lot of that is homegrown because it needs to connect to our existing supply chain tool sets internally. We do look at TMS tool sets internally to manage glossary, and how do we have access to our own translation memory in-house, because there are so many teams where this overlaps, right? So you've got the content side, and then marketing side is tied to that as well, the operations side, the brand side. How can everybody kind of see translation connected to a piece of content and make sure we're all using the same translation as well? So we have some internal TMS management as well, because we want to manage that glossary and we want accessibility to that glossary across all of our teams.
Thank you very much. It was very nice to hear you all, to hear the insights from the actual buyers and vendor sites. It was very interesting for many of us here from different sides, for freelancers, for representatives of business. So thank you once again for joining us in the end of this session.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.